The sky above the golden plains of Nuria was calm that morning. The twin suns had just risen, painting the clouds in shades of silver and rose. Traders were opening their stalls, children were playing near the crystal fountains, and the royal city of Alaris shone like a jewel in the light. The people of Nuria were proud of their world, proud of their beauty, proud of their progress, proud of being the center of wisdom in the galaxy. But on this quiet morning, something strange appeared in the sky. At first, it was only a small point of light, moving slowly across the heavens. Some thought it was a comet. Others believed it was a lost drone. But soon the light grew larger and brighter until it became clear that it was a ship, a kind none had ever seen before. The city guards raised their eyes in surprise. The royal tower sent a message to the king, and within minutes the palace courtyard filled with curious citizens. The strange vessel came closer, its metal surface shining dull gray instead of the bright silver or gold the Nurians were used to. It looked old-fashioned, simple, even fragile compared to their own ships. Yet it flew with calm purpose, descending through the air until it landed gently beyond the royal gardens. When the dust settled, everyone saw the small figure standing beside the ship. It was a human. His name was Thomas. He wore a plain suit of light fabric, marked only by a simple badge showing a small blue circle, the symbol of Earth. His hair was dark, his face calm, his eyes steady. He looked tired from travel, but not afraid. He stepped forward and looked around at the sea of golden-eyed Nurians staring at him from every direction. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, from the steps of the palace, came the sound of laughter, soft at first, then louder. The three royal sisters stood together, watching the newcomer. They were known throughout Nuria for their grace and confidence. Lyra, the eldest, wore a gown of pale gold and a crown of light crystals. Mona, the middle sister, was quiet but sharp, her smile often hiding clever thoughts. Sira, the youngest, was full of mischief and boldness. They had never seen a human before, though they had heard stories. Stories of a small, stubborn race from a green planet, far from the galactic centers, who spoke too proudly for their small power. Lyra covered her mouth with a graceful hand and whispered to her sisters, "Is that truly a human?" "He looks so plain," Mona smiled faintly. "Maybe that is their charm, simplicity." Sira laughed openly. "He looks like he built that ship with his hands. Look, even the metal looks old. Our workers use better tools than that." Their laughter carried softly through the courtyard, and Thomas heard it. He did not react. Instead, he bowed slowly, a deep, respectful bow that made the guards shift in surprise. When he straightened, his voice was calm and clear. "Greetings, people of Nuria. I am Thomas of Earth. I come in peace and in friendship." The crowd murmured. His words were in perfect Nurian speech. The translator lights above his head blinked once and then faded. He had not needed them. The sisters looked at one another. Mona tilted her head. "He learned our tongue," she said softly. "That is, unexpected." King Arian, their father, stepped forward from the palace. He was tall and dignified, with silver eyes and long robes of deep blue. His presence made the entire courtyard quiet. "You come from Earth?" the king asked. "Yes, your majesty," Tomas said. "It was a long journey. My people have long wished to learn from the great civilizations of the stars. We come not to take, but to share." The king studied him in silence. He had heard of Earth, a small world with many hopes but little power. Yet there was something in this man's calmness that held his attention. "You are welcome in Alaris," the king said finally. "You shall stay in the guest tower as our visitor. My daughters will ensure you are treated with respect." The sisters bowed politely, though their eyes still carried a sparkle of amusement. That evening the palace was full of talk. The sisters sat together in the balcony garden overlooking the glowing city. Below they could see Thomas being guided through the halls by servants, examining the strange lights and devices with quiet curiosity. Sira shook her head. "He looks lost. How can such a simple man come from another world?" Lyra leaned on the railing. "Father says humans build their own machines. They do not rely on crystal energy like we do. Maybe they are clever in their own way." Mona spoke softly. "Cleverness is not the same as wisdom," Lyra smiled. "We will see." They did not mean harm with their words, only pride. They had grown up believing Nuria was the center of perfection. To them, this quiet man from Earth seemed like a curious animal, interesting but out of place. The next morning, Thomas was brought before the royal court. He carried a small metal box in his hands. The nobles gathered, whispering as he placed it carefully on the ground. "This," Thomas said, "is a gift from my people. It holds the seeds of Earth's plants, life that can grow even in poor soil." The king watched as Thomas opened the box and lifted one small seed between his fingers. "Our lands are rich already," he said gently. "What makes your seeds special?" Thomas smiled slightly. "Because they were made to survive when hope is small." He knelt beside a pot of dry sand and placed the seed inside. Then he poured a few drops of water and turned on a small device. A soft blue glow surrounded the pot. Within moments, the sand began to move, and a tiny green sprout pushed through. The court gasped. Thomas looked up and said, "It will grow into food within a day." "On my world, we made these when our soil was tired. We learned that even poor ground can live again if given care." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mona said quietly, "That is useful," Sira whispered. "Strange, but clever." Even Lyra's eyes softened. "He has skill," she admitted. The king smiled faintly. "You bring life, Thomas of Earth. That is a noble gift." Thomas bowed again. "Life is all we truly have to give." Over the next few days, Thomas became a quiet wonder in the palace. He asked questions about Nurian crystals, about their light towers, about their songs that floated through the air at night. He never spoke of power or trade, only of learning. The sisters began to test him, though they called it conversation. One afternoon, they invited him to the garden where floating mirrors caught sunlight and turned it into streams of color. Lyra said, "Thomas, what do humans do when their suns fade?" He looked up at the mirrors and answered simply, "We make our own light. Not from crystals, but from work and hope." Mona said, "And when your people fight, how do you win?" He shook his head gently. "We do not always win. But we try to understand before we act. That saves more than strength ever could." Sira frowned. "That sounds slow." "Nurians act with certainty," Thomas smiled. "Perhaps that is why you shine so bright. But even stars must rest sometimes or they burn out." The sisters exchanged glances. His answers were not what they expected. They sounded soft, but they carried quiet power. As days passed, Thomas continued to share small pieces of Earth's ways. He showed the royal gardeners how to reuse wastewater to feed their plants. He explained to the scholars how wind could be turned into steady energy without crystals. He even taught the palace children songs from Earth that spoke of dreams and courage. The people of Alaris began to whisper about the human. They said he was not like others, that his voice carried calmness like a deep river. The sisters heard these whispers too. One evening, they watched him from the upper balcony as he stood beneath the twin suns, speaking with workers repairing an airfloat. He was not giving orders. He was helping, holding tools, smiling as he listened. Sirah spoke softly. "He helps them like he is one of them. No one from our court would do that." Mona nodded. "He is strange. But maybe not weak." Lyra looked thoughtful. "Perhaps we judged him too quickly." Later that night, Thomas stood by the garden pond, watching the reflections of the stars. Lyra approached quietly. "You are far from home," she said. He smiled faintly. "Yes, but stars look the same everywhere. They remind me that we are not so different." Lyra hesitated, then said, "When you arrived, we laughed. It was wrong of us." Thomas turned to her, gentle in expression. "It is natural to laugh at what we do not understand. I have done the same before." Lyra looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the plain human she once mocked, but someone with quiet dignity, a strength that did not need to shout. The wind carried the soft sound of Nurian bells across the city, and the night seemed peaceful. For the first time, Lyra wondered if Earth, that small forgotten world, might hold something their great kingdom had long lost: humility. And somewhere in the high tower, King Arian watched from his window. He had seen the way his daughter's laughter had changed into thought. The human had not come with wealth or armies, yet he had already begun to shift the hearts of those around him. The king smiled to himself. "Perhaps," he whispered, "the stars still send teachers in humble forms." The twin suns sank behind the hills, and the night of Nurea glowed with silver light, marking the quiet beginning of a story that would change two worlds forever. Morning light spread across the sky of Nurea, soft and golden. The royal city of Alaris shimmered as the twin suns climbed higher, sending reflections off the towers of crystal and glass. People moved through the shining streets, speaking of only one thing: the visitor from Earth. It had been 3 days since Thomas arrived, and already his name had become a quiet echo in every hall. Some spoke kindly, saying he was wise and humble. Others said he was strange, too soft for a world of strength and power. But all agreed on one thing: he was different. Inside the palace, the 3 royal sisters sat together in their morning hall. Servants poured sweet blue tea, and the air smelled of sunlight and flowers. Sira leaned back on her chair. "Father treats that human as if he is a great scholar," she said with a small laugh. "But he speaks like a farmer. No grand words, no fine robes." Mona stirred her tea slowly. "Maybe that is his way. Still, I wonder if he is as clever as he seems. Anyone can make a seed grow if they know tricks." Lyra, the eldest, looked thoughtful. "Father says his machines work without crystals. That is rare, but I wish to see for myself how his mind works." Mona smiled faintly. "Then let us test him." The 3 sisters looked at one another, and a quiet idea began to form between them, not out of cruelty, but curiosity. They wanted to see what kind of strength the human truly had. That afternoon they sent a message to Thomas inviting him to the palace garden. When he arrived, he found the 3 sisters waiting beneath the tall silver trees. The garden shimmered with fountains, glowing petals, and tiny birds made of light that sang above them. Thomas bowed politely. "Your Highnesses," he said with a calm smile. "It is a lovely day," Lyra nodded. "It is indeed. We have been speaking about your world. You say humans value wisdom, not power." "That is true," Thomas replied. "Wisdom guides us when strength fails." Sira grinned playfully. "Then let us see your wisdom, traveler." Mona stood. "We have 3 small challenges for you. Nothing cruel, only a test of what you call human understanding." Thomas smiled slightly. "I will try, though I am no magician." The sisters looked pleased. The first challenge began. The first challenge. The stone Lyra led him to the center of the garden, where a huge crystal stone stood. It was beautiful and heavy, carved with lines of light that glowed faintly. "This stone," Lyra said, "was meant to be moved to the center of the fountain. It is too heavy for any one person to lift. Even our strongest guards need machines to move it. But perhaps you, Thomas of Earth, know another way." The servants and guards gathered nearby, whispering. Thomas looked at the stone quietly. He didn't rush. He ran his hand over the surface, feeling its weight and shape. He then looked around the garden and noticed long vines, wooden poles, and smooth stones. Slowly, he began to gather them. "What is he doing?" Sira whispered, amused. "Collecting sticks," Mona said softly. "Is this the wisdom of humans?" Thomas smiled as he worked. With patience, he tied the vines together, fixed the poles into a triangle, and placed smooth stones beneath the structure. When it was ready, he looped the rope around the crystal and began to pull gently. To everyone's surprise, the heavy stone began to move, slowly but surely, rolling toward the fountain. Lyra's eyes widened. "He used balance," she whispered. Thomas nodded as he stopped to rest. "On Earth, we learned long ago that we don't always need great strength. We only need to understand how things move." The stone reached its place, and the water in the fountain began to shimmer around it. The crowd clapped softly in respect. The first challenge was complete. The second challenge, the puzzle of light now. Mona took her turn. She guided Thomas into the palace hall of mirrors. The walls sparkled with shifting lights that danced like liquid stars. In the center stood a large frame made of glass. It had hundreds of small crystals fixed inside it, each reflecting the light in different ways. "This," Mona said, "is a puzzle our scholars built. The goal is to make the light form a single beam, strong enough to reach the top of the hall. No one has solved it without using power crystals. You say your people use light differently. Show us." Thomas looked at the puzzle. The lights danced wildly, scattering in every direction. He stood still, thinking. He asked softly, "May I turn off the palace lights for a moment?" Mona raised an eyebrow but nodded. The hall dimmed, leaving only the soft glow of the puzzle. Thomas stepped closer and began adjusting the crystals one by one. He did not rush. Each time he turned a crystal, he watched how the light moved. Lyra and Sira watched from the side, whispering to each other. "Does he even know what he is doing?" Sira asked. "Maybe," Lyra said. "Or maybe he is only guessing." Minutes passed. Then Thomas adjusted one final crystal, and suddenly the lights merged into a single golden beam that rose upward like a pillar, touching the ceiling and lighting up the entire hall. The sisters gasped softly. The servants clapped. The light shone like a living flame, pure and warm. Mona's eyes widened. "How did you do that?" Thomas smiled humbly. "On Earth, we learned that light does not fight itself. When you guide it carefully, it becomes stronger together." Mona looked at him with quiet respect. "You speak simply, but there is truth in your words." The third challenge. The Song of Harmony at last, Sira stepped forward. She was the youngest, full of spirit and pride. "You have moved a stone and solved a puzzle," she said with a playful smile. "But wisdom is not only in hands or eyes. It is also in heart. My challenge is different." She led him to a small courtyard where musicians sat with glowing instruments. "Here," Sira said, "music flows with the rhythm of our energy. Each person must match the song to their inner light. If you cannot do that, the sound will fall apart. You say humans feel deeply. Let us see how true that is." Thomas looked at the strange instruments, long strings that glowed when touched, drums that sang instead of echoing. He had never seen such things. The musicians began to play a gentle melody, rising and falling like waves. Sira handed Thomas a small wind flute made of crystal. He took it carefully and waited, listening. The music surrounded him, soft and full of emotion. He closed his eyes, breathing slowly, then raised the flute and began to play. At first the sound was uncertain, simple, human, almost too plain for the beauty of Nurian music. But as he continued, the tones began to blend with the others. His melody carried warmth, something deep and human, something that spoke not of power or perfection but of longing, of home, of hope. The Nurians stopped whispering. The instruments adjusted to match him. The song grew stronger, flowing like light through water. When the final note faded, there was silence. Then the courtyard filled with quiet applause. Even Sira, who had meant to test him with mischief, smiled softly. "Your music is different," she said. "It feels real." Thomas bowed slightly. "It is not perfect. But neither are we. That is why it feels true." Sira looked down, her laughter replaced by thought. That evening, the king invited Thomas to dine with the royal family. The sisters sat quietly as their father spoke. "My daughters tell me you have completed their challenges," King Arian said. Thomas smiled gently. "They were fair and wise. Each one taught me something about your world." The king nodded. "And they tell me you completed them all with patience and understanding. Many in my court believe wisdom comes from power. You show that it can come from calmness." Thomas looked around the great table. "On Earth we learned that storms destroy, but steady rain brings life. I only tried to be steady." The king studied him with kind eyes. "You remind us that greatness does not need brightness to shine." Lyra spoke quietly. "Father, he is unlike anyone we have met." Mona nodded. "His ways are humble but clever," Sira smiled. "And his heart is gentle." The king looked at them amused. So the sisters who laughed now speak with respect." They lowered their heads slightly, smiling in embarrassment. Thomas said softly, "They were honest from the beginning, and I am grateful for that. Truth, even when sharp, helps us see clearly." The king laughed warmly. "You speak like a philosopher, Thomas of Earth. Perhaps our worlds have more to share than I thought." That night, as Thomas returned to his chamber, he looked out through the wide window toward the glowing city below. The stars shone above, just as they did back home. He thought about the three sisters, Lyra's calm pride, Mona's quiet mind, Sira's spirited heart. They had tested him, but not out of cruelty. They had wanted to understand him just as he wanted to understand them. He smiled to himself. "Perhaps," he whispered, "understanding begins with challenge." Far below, the fountains of Alaris shimmered in soft blue light. The human visitor from Earth had passed the tests, but the true challenge, and the one that would shape the fate of two worlds, was only beginning. The days after the challenges passed like quiet waves upon a calm sea. The royal city of Alaris shone brighter than ever under the twin suns, but now, its light seemed to carry a softer meaning. Wherever Thomas went, people whispered kindly about him, not as a hero or a master, but as someone who taught without demanding, someone who changed others by simply being himself. In the beginning, the sisters had laughed at him. They had seen a stranger who spoke gently instead of proudly, who worked with his hands instead of boasting about his home world. But now their laughter had turned into quiet curiosity. Each of them began to notice different things about him. Lyra, the eldest, saw how he listened more than he spoke. Even when others disagreed with him, he did not argue. He only asked questions that made them think. Mona saw how he observed small details others ignored. The tired gardener who worked too long, the servants who ate last, the bird nests built near the palace lights. Sira saw how he treated everyone the same, kings, workers, or children. He never bowed too low, never spoke too high. To him, all were worthy of the same respect. It was strange for them. On Nurea, status was everything. Rank, birth, and power decided worth. But Thomas walked through that glittering system as if it were invisible. And somehow that made others start to look past it too. One morning, King Arian invited Thomas to walk with him in the royal orchard. The air was filled with sweet perfume from crystal blossom trees, and the paths were lined with golden sand. The king spoke first. "You have become quite the teacher without meaning to, Thomas of Earth." Thomas smiled humbly. "I did not come to teach, your majesty. I only came to learn." Arian looked at him thoughtfully. "And yet my people learned from you. You have done what many great scholars could not." "I think they only remember what they already knew," Thomas said softly. "Sometimes truth only needs a small reminder." The king smiled. "You speak as if wisdom were a seed." "It is," Thomas said. "A seed grows not because it is strong, but because the soil gives it space." Arian nodded slowly. "Your words are gentle, Thomas. I wonder if gentleness could ever lead a kingdom." "Perhaps not lead," Thomas replied. "But it can guide. Even kings need calm voices among their loud ones." The king looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You remind me of my late queen." "She used to say the same thing." Thomas bowed his head in respect. "Then I am honored to echo her wisdom." While Thomas spent time with the king, the sisters found themselves talking about him more often than they expected. That afternoon, they met in their private hall where the windows opened to the wide gardens. Sira was the first to speak. "I don't understand him. He works beside servants as if he were one of them. He helps the workers repair things and never waits for someone to do it for him." Mona replied, "He says his people build everything by hand. Maybe it makes him feel at home." Lyra looked thoughtful. "He is not proud. That is why people listen to him. When he speaks, it feels true." Sira crossed her arms. "Still, he is too humble. No one will follow someone who never commands." Lyra smiled slightly. "Perhaps leadership is not about command. Perhaps it is about trust." The youngest sister frowned, then sighed. "Maybe you're right, but it still feels strange. He's so calm, as if nothing can shake him." Mona set down her cup. Maybe that calm is his strength. Later that day, Thomas went to the royal gardens again. He found the head gardener struggling with a broken water line. The pipes had burst and the flowers were drying under the suns. Thomas knelt beside him without hesitation. "May I help?" he asked. The gardener looked surprised. "Sir, this is not work for a guest of the king." Thomas smiled. "Then let it be work for a man who loves plants." Together they worked to repair the pipe. Thomas used simple tools he had built himself from spare parts, showing the gardener how to make joints stronger without using crystal energy. By the time they were done, the water flowed smoothly again and the gardener looked amazed. "You fixed what even the palace engineers could not," he said. Thomas shook his head. "We fixed it together. That is all that matters." Unseen by him, the three sisters had been walking nearby. They watched silently from a distance. Lyra whispered, "He could have ordered others to do it, but he helped instead." Mona said, "He doesn't care how he looks. Only that the work is done." Sira, who had always spoken most boldly, was quiet this time. She only said, "No wonder the workers like him." That evening, the king called for a gathering in the grand hall. The nobles of Alaris filled the chamber, dressed in brilliant robes, their jewels glowing under the crystal lights. Thomas stood quietly near the side, wearing his same simple suit. The king rose and said, "Tonight we honor Thomas of Earth, a man who came to us not with power, but with peace. He reminds us that humility is not weakness, but wisdom in quiet form." The nobles applauded politely, though some did so with uncertain smiles. They were used to praising warriors and scholars, not men who fixed pipes and taught farmers. Lyra stepped forward and said, "Father, may Thomas speak?" "I wish to hear his thoughts," the king nodded. "You may." Thomas bowed slightly and stepped into the light. His voice was calm and warm. "I thank you all for your kindness," he said. "Your world is rich in beauty and light. But true greatness is not only in shining towers or glowing jewels. It is in the small things that last. Kindness, patience, and care for one another." He looked around the hall. "On Earth, we learned that even the smallest seed can break stone if it is given time. Every person, no matter how simple, has that same power to bring change through goodness." The hall grew very quiet. Even those who had doubted him listened. Then Thomas smiled gently. "I am not wise or strong. I am only human. But maybe that is enough." When he finished, the king rose again and said, "It is more than enough." The applause that followed was no longer polite. It was sincere. After the gathering ended, the sisters met him in the garden once more. The air was cool and the moons had begun to rise. Lyra said softly, "You spoke well tonight." "Many hearts were moved," Thomas smiled. "I only spoke what I believed." Mona said, "Your words make people think differently. Even I cannot stop wondering now about what true greatness means." Sira, looking up at the stars, said quietly, "You make us see our world with new eyes." Thomas looked at her gently. "I see your world is already full of light. I only show where the shadows fall." The three sisters fell silent, thinking. Finally, Lyra said, "Thomas, do humans ever feel proud of their wisdom?" Thomas laughed softly. "Of course, sometimes too much. But the moment we think we are the wisest, we stop learning, so we try to remember humility." Sira asked, "What does humility mean to you?" He thought for a moment, then said, "It means knowing that I can be wrong and still be willing to listen. It means seeing worth in others, even when they do not see it in themselves." Mona whispered, "That sounds harder than any challenge." "It is," Thomas said, "but it keeps us human." As the days passed, the sisters began to change. Lyra, who had once been proud and certain of her perfection, started spending more time speaking with the scholars and learning from them, rather than only commanding them. Mona, who had always been quiet but distant, began walking among the city's people, asking about their lives, understanding their struggles. Sira, the most spirited, started helping the younger students in the palace school, teaching them songs and stories she had once thought too simple. The king saw all this and said to Thomas one evening, "My daughters have changed. They laugh less at others and listen more. What did you teach them?" Thomas smiled. "I did not teach. They only saw through different eyes." One night a soft rain fell over Ilaris. The gardens shimmered and the fountains overflowed gently. Thomas walked alone through the courtyard, enjoying the quiet. The sisters soon joined him, carrying a small crystal lantern. Lyra said, "We came to thank you." Mona added, "Not just for your wisdom, but for your patience." Sira smiled warmly. "You showed us that power is not always loud." Thomas looked at them kindly. "You have learned something many worlds forget. True power is quiet. It builds, it heals, it forgives." The rain sparkled on their hair like tiny diamonds. The four of them stood together in the gentle glow of the lantern, watching the reflections dance across the pond. At that moment, they were no longer a royal family and a visitor. They were simply people, equals under the same reign, sharing one world of light and understanding. From that day on, the people of Nuria began to speak of a new way, the way of calm. It spread from the palace to the streets, from nobles to workers. They learned that humility did not lower a person. It raised everyone together, and at the center of that quiet change stood Thomas, the human from Earth. Not as a ruler, not as a savior, but as a reminder that sometimes the smallest voice can carry the greatest truth. The season of the twin moons had arrived on Nuria. It was the most peaceful time of the year, when soft blue light bathed the royal city of Ilaris, and the gardens glowed with gentle color. Every evening, music floated from the open balconies and laughter filled the warm air. But inside the royal palace, King Arian sat in deep thought. The chamber around him was silent except for the sound of the fountains outside. On the table before him lay reports from his advisors about trade, science, and diplomacy. Yet his eyes were fixed not on the papers, but on the horizon beyond the window. He had seen many changes in his people since the arrival of Thomas, the human from Earth. The pride that once ruled Nuria had softened. The nobles had begun to speak with kindness. The workers felt valued, and the scholars spoke more about cooperation than competition. And his daughters, his 3 beloved daughters, had changed most of all. Where once there had been laughter at the expense of others, there was now quiet wisdom. Lyra, Mona, and Sira had grown thoughtful and humble, and he knew that this change had begun with the man who now worked in the palace gardens as if he were born there. The king smiled faintly. "Strange," he murmured, "how one person can shift the hearts of many without force or command." That evening, King Arion invited Thomas to dine with him privately. The room was warm with golden light and soft music played in the distance. As Thomas entered, he bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty called for me?" Arion gestured to the seat across the table. "Yes, Thomas of Earth, please sit. I wish to speak with you not as a king, but as a father." Thomas sat quietly. Sensing the weight in the king's voice, Arion poured tea himself, something he rarely did, and handed a cup to Thomas. "You have been among us for many weeks. You have changed the way my people think. You have taught us that strength without kindness is hollow. But there is something I wish to understand. Why do you serve when you could lead?" Thomas smiled humbly. "Because service is the root of all true leadership, Your Majesty. A leader who forgets to serve forgets why others follow." The king nodded slowly. "You speak with the wisdom of 10 lifetimes. Tell me, Thomas, does your world send teachers to others often?" Thomas shook his head. "No, my world sends learners. I only share what I have learned from others." The king studied him carefully. "You are unlike any visitor who has come here. You speak softly, yet your words carry weight. You do not ask for reward, yet your actions bring honor. Tell me truthfully, Thomas, what do you wish from Nuria?" Thomas looked into the king's eyes. "Nothing but friendship, Your Majesty. Earth is far and lonely. We seek connection, not conquest." The king was silent for a long moment. Then he said softly, "And yet perhaps the stars have sent you not for connection but for correction. My people have grown proud and you reminded us of what we once were." Thomas bowed his head. "I only reminded them of what still lives in their hearts." Meanwhile, the 3 royal sisters stood outside the hall, waiting. They had not been invited to the private dinner, but curiosity filled their minds. Sira whispered, "Do you think Father plans to reward him?" Mona said, "Maybe he wishes to offer him a title. Father has done so before." Lyra shook her head gently. "No, Father's tone was different today. I think his thoughts go deeper than reward." They listened quietly as the sound of voices drifted faintly through the doors. Calm, thoughtful, full of meaning. When Thomas finally left the chamber, he looked peaceful, though there was a trace of surprise in his eyes. He bowed to the sisters politely before walking toward the garden. Sira leaned toward Lyra and whispered. He looked as if Father told him something serious. Lyra nodded. "We shall soon know." The next morning the palace buzzed with quiet excitement. A message was sent to every noble house and guild in Alaris. King Arion had called for a royal assembly at sunset. The topic was not stated. By evening the grand hall was filled. The high crystal ceiling reflected the colors of the twin suns, and golden banners hung from the walls. The air was heavy with curiosity. Thomas stood near the side, unsure why he had been called. The 3 sisters stood together at the front beside their father. When the hall grew silent, the king rose from his throne. His voice, calm but firm, filled the air. "People of Nuria," he said, "we live in a world of light and knowledge. Yet wisdom is not only born from power. Sometimes it arrives quietly from places we least expect." He gestured toward Thomas. "When this man came to us, we laughed. We saw only his plain clothes and simple ways. But through his calmness and kindness, he taught us more about greatness than 1,000 lessons ever could." The crowd murmured softly in agreement. The king continued. "He showed us that humility is not weakness, but the foundation of true strength. That service can shine brighter than command. And he reminded us that even kings must listen if they wish to lead." Then he paused, looking toward his daughters. "My own children, too, have learned from him. Their hearts have grown wiser. Their laughter now carries kindness instead of pride. For that I am thankful." Lyra, Mona, and Sira lowered their eyes with soft smiles. The king took a deep breath. "Therefore I have decided something that shall join the wisdom of 2 worlds. Thomas of Earth shall not leave as a guest, but as family. One of my daughters shall marry him, and through this union, our worlds shall be forever linked in friendship and peace." A wave of surprise spread through the hall. Nobles gasped softly. The sisters looked at each other in shock. Thomas's eyes widened in disbelief. He stepped forward quickly. "Your Majesty, I am honored beyond words, but I never sought such a bond. I came only to share and learn," the king smiled kindly. "I know. That is why you are worthy of it. Power should not be given to those who chase it, but to those who respect it." The three sisters stood in silence. They had never imagined such a command. Marriage was not only a union of hearts on Nuria, it was also a symbol of honor and alliance. Sira was the first to speak. "Father," she said softly, "you cannot force a marriage as a lesson." The king looked at her gently. "I do not force, I offer. The choice is yours. The three of you shall decide among yourselves. I only ask that one of you stand beside him, not for power or duty, but for what he represents." The hall was quiet again. All eyes turned toward the sisters. Lyra took a slow breath. "Father, may we have time to speak privately?" The king nodded. "You shall have until sunrise." That night the sisters gathered in their shared chamber. The light of the moons fell through the windows, painting the room in silver. None of them spoke for a while. Finally, Mona broke the silence. "We must decide before morning." "But how can we choose such a thing?" Sira looked at her hands. "Father believes it is honor, but it feels like something greater. Thomas changed us. Maybe this is fate, not duty." Lyra stood by the window, gazing at the stars. "When he came here, we laughed at him. Now I cannot laugh at anything he says. I see his truth in everything around us," Mona sighed softly. "If one of us marries him, it should be someone who sees him not as a symbol, but as a person." Sira smiled faintly. "You mean someone who truly understands him." Lyra turned from the window. "Then perhaps none of us should marry for the sake of a lesson. We should honor him in another way." The three sisters sat together until the first light of dawn touched the sky. They spoke not of power or duty, but of kindness, purpose, and understanding. By the time the sun rose, their hearts had found their answer. When morning came, the court gathered again. Thomas stood beside the king, unsure of what to expect. The three sisters entered, dressed in simple white gowns without jewels or crowns. They bowed before their father. Lyra spoke first. "Father, we have decided. We will not let one sister marry him alone. Instead, we choose to stand beside him together, not as wives, but as allies, as learners, as friends." The king looked surprised, but then a slow smile spread across his face. "Together?" Mona nodded. "Yes, because what he brought us was not a man to love, but a truth to live." Sira added, "If this union is to join our worlds, then let it be through unity, not ownership." The hall was silent. Then the king rose, his voice warm and proud. "So be it. Let the human and my daughter stand as symbols of understanding between our peoples." He turned to Thomas. "You came as a visitor, Thomas of Earth. You will stay as a bridge and between hearts, between worlds." Thomas bowed deeply. "I am honored, Your Majesty. May our worlds grow wiser together." That evening, the palace held a celebration, not a wedding, but a ceremony of unity. The sisters and Thomas stood together on the royal balcony as thousands of Nurians cheered below. Light fountains rose into the sky, forming shapes of stars and leaves, symbols of new beginnings. As the crowd sang the song of harmony, Thomas looked at the king, who smiled proudly from his throne, and in that moment, Thomas felt what true leadership meant: not command, not control, but the courage to listen, to change, and to grow. The king's decision had not been about marriage alone. It had been about something far greater, a reminder that the greatest power in any world is not strength or pride, but humility shared between hearts. The golden dawn rose slowly over Nuria, washing the skies in soft silver and blue. The twin suns shone like two gentle eyes watching a new day unfold, a day unlike any the people of Nuria had seen before. The royal city of Alaris, bright and alive, was preparing for a celebration that would be remembered for centuries. Flags of light hung across the towers. Crystal fountains shimmered with new colors. The streets were filled with music, laughter, and the scent of blossoms. Every citizen, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, felt something new stirring in their hearts, a sense of peace, of pride mixed with humility. For the first time, the people of Nuria were not celebrating a victory, not honoring a king or a warrior. They were celebrating something far greater, the friendship between two worlds. In the royal palace, the preparations had already begun before sunrise. The sisters, Lyra, Mona, and Sira, dressed in white and silver robes that caught the morning light. They wore no jewels, no crowns, no signs of wealth. Instead, each of them wore a single small pendant, a gift Thomas had given them, shaped like the blue circle of Earth. Thomas stood in the garden below, wearing his simple Earth uniform, freshly cleaned but unchanged. He looked around the palace with quiet wonder. It was the same place where he had first been laughed at, the same halls where he had been tested and questioned. Yet now every servant and guard greeted him with warmth and respect. He smiled to himself. Change, he thought, does not come from shouting. It comes from listening. When he turned, he saw the king walking toward him. Arian's robe was deep blue, the color of wisdom. His silver eyes reflected kindness. Thomas, the king said, today we celebrate not your strength or mine, but our bond. You have given my people a gift beyond gold or power, understanding. Thomas bowed slightly. And you, your majesty, have given me faith in what hearts can become when they listen. Arian placed a hand on his shoulder. Then let us show the stars that two worlds can walk as one. As the suns climbed higher, the people of Alaris gathered in the grand courtyard. The wide space was surrounded by shining towers and floating lights. The great fountain in the center had been filled with clear blue water brought from Thomas's ship, a symbol of Earth joining Nurea. Music began, soft, steady, full of harmony. The crowd fell silent as the king, his daughters, and Thomas stepped onto the platform before the fountain. The king raised his hand. His voice carried across the courtyard. People of Nurea, he said, we once looked at the stars and believed we were the brightest among them. But now we know that even the smallest star can bring light when seen from a new angle. Thomas of Earth has shown us that greatness does not come from power alone, but from patience, kindness, and respect. He turned to Thomas, and today, we open our hearts to his people, the people of Earth. From this day forward, Nuria and Earth shall be bound not by law but by friendship. We will share our knowledge, our hopes, and our dreams. We will walk together as equals. The crowd erupted in cheers. The sound was soft but powerful, like a wave of warmth spreading through the city. Lyra stepped forward next. Her voice was calm and clear. When Thomas came to us, we laughed, she said. We thought ourselves higher. But he showed us that humility is not a weakness. It is a light that helps us see truth, Mona continued. He taught us to listen, to look beyond what we know. Through him, we learned that knowledge without compassion is empty. And Sira added with a bright smile, he showed us that joy is not found in pride, but in kindness. He became our teacher, our friend, and now, our bridge to a new world. Their words echoed softly through the courtyard. Even the wind seemed to pause. Thomas felt his chest tighten with quiet emotion. He had never imagined that his simple journey, meant only for understanding, would lead to this moment of peace. He stepped forward, his voice steady. When I left Earth, I thought I was coming to learn from a greater world. But what I found here is not greatness of power. It is greatness of heart. You opened your doors even when you did not understand me. And that is the truest wisdom of all. He looked at the king and the three sisters. Earth will remember Nuria not as a distant world, but as family. Together we will build something beautiful, not perfect, but kind. The crowd applauded softly, and many had tears in their eyes. After the speeches, the ceremony of unity began. The king lifted a small silver bowl filled with water from both worlds, half from Nuria's crystal springs, half from Earth's rivers. He poured the water into the great fountain. The liquid shimmered with light, and for a moment, the water turned pure white before spreading in ripples of blue and gold. Two worlds, the king said, flowing together as one. The fountains began to sing, a soft sound that rose like gentle music. Children in the crowd laughed and clapped as petals of light floated through the air. The people felt something sacred in the moment, something beyond words. It was not magic. It was harmony. Days turned into weeks, and the friendship between Earth and Nuria grew stronger. Thomas remained in the palace as the first ambassador of his world, but he refused titles and honors. Instead, he worked beside the scholars and builders, helping to create new systems that blended both worlds' knowledge. He showed Nurian engineers how humans stored energy without crystals, using wind and water instead of light stones. In return, they taught him how to weave living light into structures that healed themselves when broken. Together, they built gardens that glowed softly at night, powered by both sunlight and song. They created floating farms that needed no soil, combining Earth's seeds and Nuria's crystal energy to feed both worlds. Each project carried a quiet symbol, a circle of blue and gold, representing their shared bond. The HFY sisters also continued to grow in their own ways. Lyra became the ambassador of wisdom, guiding discussions between scholars of both worlds. She often said, "Let every question begin with kindness." Mona worked with healers, studying Earth's plants and medicines. Her calm nature brought comfort to all who came to her. Sira traveled with Thomas to the nearby settlements, teaching children songs from both planets. Her laughter, once sharp, was now full of joy and warmth. Everywhere they went, people remembered what they had once been, proud and distant, and what they had become, humble, united and free of arrogance. One quiet evening, Thomas and the king sat together on the palace balcony, watching the stars rise above the silver horizon. "Do you miss your home?" the king asked. Thomas smiled softly. "Sometimes. But in truth, I feel at home here now. When I look at the stars, I see both our worlds shining together." The king nodded. "You have given my daughters new hearts and my people new eyes. I am old, Thomas, but when I see the young ones grow in peace, I know the future is safe." Thomas looked thoughtful. "Peace is never finished, Your Majesty. It must be cared for, like a garden. It will need both our worlds to keep it alive." Arian smiled. "Then let us promise that neither of our worlds will ever walk alone again." They raised their cups to the stars, not as king and visitor, but as friends. Years later, stories of the human who changed Nurea spread across the stars. They called him the Quiet Bridge. Children on both worlds learned about how he came not with weapons or wealth, but with patience and understanding. In schools, teachers would point to his image and say, "Be like Thomas, humble, kind, and curious." And on Earth, when the first Nurian ship arrived with gifts of glowing crystals and songs of harmony, people welcomed them with tears and laughter. For the first time in history, two worlds shared not conquest but compassion. In his final years, Thomas often walked through the same garden where he had first met the royal sisters. The fountains still sang and the flowers still bloomed with golden light. One evening, as the sky turned soft with sunset, the sisters joined him again. Sira smiled. "Do you ever think about the day you first came here?" Thomas chuckled. "Every time I walk through these gardens, I remember your laughter. It taught me patience," Lyra said warmly. "And you taught us to see with gentler eyes," Mona added softly. "You gave us more than peace. You gave us meaning." Thomas looked at them with affection. "You gave me the same. I came as a stranger, but I leave as part of your story." The sisters stood beside him, watching the sun set behind the hills. Their world was brighter now, not because of light, but because of the understanding they shared. That night, the stars above Nurea shone a little clearer. People across the city lit candles in their homes, whispering blessings for both worlds. And among them, one old man from Earth smiled quietly, knowing that no matter how far apart the stars seemed, the hearts that reached toward one another had already made the universe smaller, kinder, and full of hope. Thus ended the story of Thomas, the human who taught a proud world the value of humility, who turned laughter into friendship, and who proved that sometimes the simplest heart can change the brightest stars. And so, the union of worlds was not written in law or stone, but in kindness, a bridge built from one man's quiet strength and three sisters' open hearts shining forever among the stars.